In the dim, cold recesses of deep space, humanity's survival rested on the shoulders of a child who didn't yet realize the magnitude of his destiny. Ender Wiggin, only 6 years old, sat silently in the sterile room as his monitor, the device tracking his every thought and movement, was removed from the back of his neck. The absence of the device felt like freedom and isolation all at once. He knew the meaning behind the monitor's removal, his evaluation was complete, and the decision had been made. Two figures stepped into the room, their faces obscured by shadow. One was Colonel Graff, a high-ranking official in the international fleet, and the other, a stranger in a crisp uniform that seemed out of place against the stark walls. Ender Wiggin, Graff spoke, his voice steady, measured. "You've been chosen." Ender didn't respond immediately. Chosen. The word hung in the air like a weight. He knew what it meant. It was why his brother Peter wasn't selected, why his sister Valentine had been passed over. His mind raced through the implications, but outwardly, he remained calm. Chosen for what? Ender finally asked, his voice betraying no emotion. To save the human race, Graff replied bluntly, his gaze unyielding. War is coming, Ender. The Formics, the enemy we barely defeated last time, are preparing to strike again. You've been selected to attend battle school. We need commanders who can think faster, act sharper, and win decisively. You're our best hope. Ender's mind raced. The Formics. The alien race that had nearly annihilated humanity in the first and second invasions. They were coming back, and this time, humanity might not survive. I'm just a kid, Ender said softly. You're not just a kid, Graff corrected. You're the one. Ender said nothing, but the air in the room seemed to shift. He knew, deep down, that Graff was right. He was different. His mind worked in ways that others couldn't grasp. He could see patterns where none should exist, anticipate moves before they were made. But was that enough to save humanity? Without another word, Ender was whisked away from the only home he'd ever known, leaving behind his family, his sister Valentine, the only person who truly loved him, and the Earth, which felt more distant with each passing moment. The launch into space was a blur of sensations. Gravity disappeared, and the weightlessness made everything feel unreal. But the real journey was just beginning. The battle school loomed ahead, a massive station floating in the vast emptiness of space, designed to mold the best and brightest into war leaders. Ender felt the pressure mounting, a quiet anxiety settling in his stomach. He wasn't just training to fight a war, he was being prepared to lead it. Upon arrival, it became clear that battle school was no ordinary place. The children were sorted into armies, thrown into a relentless cycle of simulated battles in zero gravity. The simulations were more than just games, they were brutal tests of strategy, teamwork, and survival. Mistakes weren't tolerated. Failure wasn't an option. Ender's mind worked faster than anyone expected. He quickly rose through the ranks, mastering every challenge thrown at him. But with each victory came greater isolation. The other children resented him, some even feared him. They didn't understand how he thought, how he could see through every possible outcome, predicting their moves before they made them. Graff and the other instructors watched him closely, manipulating the simulations, pushing him harder, isolating him further. They needed to break him to see what he was truly capable of. The days blurred into weeks, the weeks into months. The battles became more intense, the stakes higher. Ender learned to lead, not just with strategy, but with instinct. He pushed his army beyond their limits, breaking every rule, every assumption. His victories became legendary, but so did his ruthlessness. There was no room for mercy in war. But it wasn't just the battles in the simulation rooms that weighed on Ender. It was the psychological warfare outside of them. The constant tests, the endless games. The instructors were always watching, always prodding, trying to see if Ender would break. But he didn't. He couldn't. He knew what was at stake. In the quiet moments, when the noise of war faded, Ender thought about Valentine. He thought about Earth. He wondered if there would be anything left of it by the time the war was over. The Formics were coming. He could feel it in his bones. One night, as Ender sat in the empty dormitory, exhausted from another brutal day of training, Graf appeared. The look on his face was different this time, more serious, more final. "It's time," Graf said, his voice low. Ender stared at him, his heart pounding. "Time for what?" Graf's eyes were hard. "Time to face the real enemy." Ender was taken to a new part of battle school, a place he'd never been before. The room was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of a massive holographic display. In front of the display stood Mazer Rackham, the hero of the Second Invasion, the man who had defeated the Formics decades ago. "You've been training for this your whole life, Ender," Mazer said, his voice deep and commanding. "Everything you've done, every battle you've fought, it's all been leading to this moment. The Formics are on their way, and we have one chance to stop them." Ender's mind raced. He wasn't ready. He couldn't be. But Mazer's words were final. There was no turning back now. The final simulation began. It was unlike anything Ender had ever seen before. The scale was massive, the stakes higher than ever. Fleets of human ships clashed with the Formic armada, the battle unfolding across the void of space. Ender's every decision was crucial, every move a matter of life and death. He pushed his fleet harder than ever before, using every trick he had learned, every strategy he had mastered. And then, in a moment of sheer brilliance, Ender made the call. He sacrificed everything, sending his fleet on a suicide mission straight into the heart of the Formic homeworld. It was a gamble, a reckless, desperate move, but it worked. The Formic fleet was destroyed in a massive explosion, their homeworld obliterated. The simulation ended. Silence filled the room. Ender sat in stunned disbelief, his hands trembling. He had done it. He had won. But then Mazer spoke, his voice soft but heavy with the weight of truth. "It wasn't a simulation, Ender," he said. "It was real." Ender's world shattered in an instant. The battles he had fought, the ships he had commanded, they were real. The lives lost were real. And he, Ender Wiggin, had just committed genocide. The Formics were gone. Wiped out. And it was all because of him. Ender felt the weight of the universe press down on him. He had won the war, but at what cost? The victory tasted like ashes. He had been used, manipulated, turned into a weapon of mass destruction. But as the realization sank in, something darker stirred within him. The war might be over, but the battle for Ender's soul had just begun. There were still questions. Secrets buried deep in the heart of the international fleet. And as Ender looked into the void, he knew that the real enemy wasn't the Formics. It had never been. Ender stood frozen, his mind spiraling as the weight of what he had done pressed down on him like the cold depths of space. The silence in the room seemed deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the machinery surrounding him. Mazer's eyes remained fixed on Ender, unreadable but heavy with the burden of truth. The revelation that it hadn't been a simulation, that he had just wiped out an entire species, settled into his bones like ice. His hands, still trembling from the adrenaline of battle, clenched into fists. He had been a pawn, manipulated into genocide, a tool wielded by the international fleet without even knowing it. "You never told me," Ender whispered, his voice barely audible. "You never told me it was real." Mazer's expression softened, but only slightly. "We couldn't tell you, Ender. You wouldn't have made the right decisions if you knew the truth. You would have hesitated." Ender's mind reeled. Hesitated? Was that supposed to be a justification for tricking him into slaughtering an entire race? He could barely comprehend the magnitude of it. The Formics, sentient beings, were gone. He had destroyed their homeworld, their fleet, everything. And now, there was no going back. Colonel Graf stepped forward, his face grim. "Ender, you saved humanity. Without you, the Formics would have returned, and next time, they wouldn't have stopped until we were gone. You did what had to be done." But Ender wasn't listening anymore. His eyes stared blankly ahead, his thoughts in a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. He had thought the Formics were monsters, an unrelenting alien force bent on humanity's destruction. But what if he had been wrong? What if they had only been trying to survive, just like humanity? What if the war hadn't been necessary at all? I killed them, Ender muttered, more to himself than anyone else. I killed them all. Graph's expression hardened. You won the war, Ender. You didn't just save Earth, you saved every human colony out there. You'll be remembered as the greatest commander in history. But Ender didn't care about being remembered. He didn't care about fame or victory. He had become something he never wanted to be, a weapon of destruction. The weight of that realization threatened to crush him. Suddenly, a thought struck him, cutting through the fog of his emotions like a blade. He remembered the last battle, the final strike that had destroyed the Formic homeworld. It had felt too easy, too clinical. Almost like the Formics hadn't even tried to stop him. What if something more had been going on? What if they weren't trying to attack us? Ender asked, his voice sharper now, focused. Graph and Mazer exchanged glances. What do you mean? Graph asked, his tone cautious. Ender's mind raced. The Formics, in every battle, they could have overwhelmed us. Their technology was superior, their fleet larger. But they didn't. And in the final battle, it was like they weren't even trying to defend themselves. What if we misunderstood them? What if they were trying to communicate, not destroy us? Mazer's face remained impassive, but Graph shifted uncomfortably. Ender, the Formics killed millions of humans in the first and second invasions. They wiped out entire colonies. They weren't interested in peace. But Ender wasn't convinced. He couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play, that the Formics hadn't been the mindless invaders the IF had portrayed them as. There had to be more to their story, more than just a war for survival. I want to see their world, Ender said suddenly. Graph frowned. What? I want to go to the Formic homeworld, Ender repeated, his voice firm. There has to be something left. I need to understand what I've done. I need to know if they were really our enemies. Graph looked like he was about to object, but Mazer held up a hand. Let him go, Graph. He's earned that much. Graph hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. But don't expect to find anything, Ender. Their world is gone. You saw to that. The journey to the Formic homeworld was long and silent, giving Ender ample time to reflect on everything that had happened. The vastness of space seemed to mirror the emptiness inside him. He was no longer the innocent boy who had come to battle school. He had been reshaped, remolded, into something darker, something haunted by the weight of his actions. When they arrived, the sight of the Formic homeworld was chilling. The once thriving planet was now a barren wasteland, its surface scorched and lifeless. There was no sign of the advanced civilization that had once inhabited it, only ruins and the silent remains of a world that no longer existed. But as Ender walked through the devastation, something caught his eye. A faint shimmer, like a pulse of energy, emanating from beneath the rubble. He moved closer, his heart pounding. Could it be? He carefully cleared away the debris, revealing a small, egg-shaped object glowing faintly. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, almost like a heartbeat. Ender knelt down, cradling the object in his hands. It was warm to the touch, alive. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. It was a Formic queen. The last of her kind. She hadn't been destroyed in the final battle. Somehow, she had survived. And now, she was reaching out to him. Ender's breath caught in his throat. The queen wasn't trying to communicate with words or images, but through feelings, emotions. He could sense her grief, her sorrow for the loss of her people, but also her hope. She didn't blame him for what had happened. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to understand. For the first time, Ender realized the full scope of his mistake. The Formics hadn't been the enemies he thought they were. They had been trying to reach out, trying to find a way to coexist. And now, they were all but extinct. Except for this one queen. the last remnant of an ancient species. Ender stood there, holding the fragile life in his hands, knowing that he had the power to either let it live or destroy it. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. But just as he made his decision, a message crackled through his comms, urgent, frantic. Graf's voice, tense with alarm. Ender, we have a problem. It's not over. The Formics, they're not the only ones we have to worry about. Before Ender could respond, the ground beneath him trembled. The sky above darkened, and an eerie, otherworldly energy filled the air. Something far more dangerous was coming. And this time, it wasn't just the Formics. The real enemy had yet to reveal itself. Ender stood frozen, the weight of the Queen in his hands, as the storm on the horizon loomed larger. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Ender stared at the trembling ground beneath his feet, his mind racing. The Formic Queen pulsed with life in his hands, sending a mixture of emotions that flooded his senses: fear, curiosity, hope. But it was the strange energy in the air, the darkening sky above him, that sent a chill down his spine. Something was coming, something far worse than the Formics had ever been. Before he could react, the comms crackled again, Graf's voice more urgent now. Ender, we're detecting massive energy readings from your location. You need to get out of there, now. This isn't just a tremor. Something's happening. Something we can't explain. Ender's grip tightened around the egg. He glanced at the horizon, where the sky seemed to ripple unnaturally, as if space itself was warping. Whatever was approaching was not of this universe, or at least, not a part of the universe that Ender knew. He had faced impossible odds before, but this felt different. There was an intelligence, an awareness behind this, something that had watched from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, with the Formics gone, that moment had come. The ground quaked again, stronger this time, as cracks snaked through the ruined landscape. Ender struggled to keep his balance, his heart pounding in his chest. The Queen stirred in his hands, her emotions a whirlwind of fear and desperation. She knew something was wrong, something even beyond her control. Ender made a split-second decision. He wasn't going to abandon the Queen. She was the last of her kind, the only one left who could help him understand the Formic's true purpose. And maybe, just maybe, she could help him face whatever was coming. But time was running out. He sprinted toward the shuttle, the Queen cradled against his chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, the gravity around him seeming to distort as the energy in the air intensified. His comms flared again, this time with Mazer's voice cutting through the static. Ender, you need to hear this. We've intercepted a transmission. It's not human. It's not Formic. It's something else. Ender's pulse quickened. He jumped into the shuttle and slammed the hatch shut behind him. The engines roared to life as he strapped in, hands trembling on the controls. What do you mean something else? Ender demanded. Mazer's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. It's a warning. A warning? The message says, you're next. Ender's breath caught in his throat. He stared out at the now violently warping sky, where flashes of light, too sharp, too foreign, ripped through the atmosphere. It was like watching the universe come undone. You need to leave orbit immediately, Graf barked. That's not a natural phenomenon. Something is trying to breach our dimension. As the shuttle lifted off, Ender looked down one last time at the Formic homeworld, now a decaying graveyard of its former self. He thought about the Formic Queen and the war he had unknowingly waged against a race that might have never truly been their enemy. His chest tightened with guilt. And yet, this new threat, it wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about humanity. He had to warn Earth. He had to make them understand. But more than that, he had to find out what was behind that warning, asterisk your next star. If the Formics hadn't been the enemy they thought, then who, or what, had been pulling the strings all along? The shuttle breached the atmosphere, and in moments, Ender was back among the stars. But his gaze was fixed on the swirling distortion far below, where the planet's surface now seemed to be collapsing in on itself, folding like paper under the weight of an unimaginable force. Suddenly, a new signal flashed across his console, an incoming transmission, unmarked and unlike anything he'd seen before. The shuttle's systems flickered, struggling to interpret the message, but fragments of an alien language crackled through the speakers, words unintelligible yet laced with intent. "Ender," Mazer's voice broken again, "that's not from Earth. And it's not from the Formics. Whatever it is, it's coming straight for us." Ender clenched his fists. He had to stay calm, had to think. His mind raced, replaying everything that had led him to this moment. Had the Formics been running from this threat? Was this what they had been preparing for all along? The Queen stirred again in his arms, her pulse stronger now, more focused. Ender could feel her sending something, an image, or maybe a thought, directly into his mind. It was hazy at first, but slowly it took shape. A vision of a place, an ancient, distant place, far beyond the known galaxy. And there, standing tall in the darkness, were shadows. Unfamiliar, menacing, watching him with intent. The message was clear: the Formics weren't the enemy. But whatever lay beyond the stars, lurking in the shadows, they were. Ender swallowed hard, determination filling his chest despite the fear gnawing at him. This was no longer just about surviving. This was about uncovering the truth, whatever it might be, and facing whatever lay ahead. The Formics had been a test, a pawn in a game much larger than any of them could have imagined. And now, with their queen in his hands and a galaxy at stake, Ender knew there was no turning back. The real battle was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't sure if humanity was ready. The stars stretched endlessly before him, the blackness of space pierced only by distant, cold light. But that darkness wasn't the most unnerving thing anymore. Ender felt something, someone was watching, waiting, beyond the reach of human sensors, beyond even the Formic Queen's understanding. The faint hum of the shuttle's engines was the only sound around him, but his mind buzzed with the alien transmission still echoing in the background. He knew that if they didn't act soon, the mystery behind the cryptic warning would consume them. The silence of space, usually vast and indifferent, now felt charged with tension, as if the very fabric of reality was being pulled tighter with each passing moment. The Formic Queen stirred slightly, and once again, Ender felt the surge of images in his mind. This time, the vision was clearer, strange ships, unlike anything he'd ever seen, gliding through the void, angular, dark, almost as if they were born of shadow itself. They weren't like the Formic crafts, nor were they anything humanity had designed. They radiated malevolence, a kind of cold intelligence that sent a shiver down Ender's spine. "Mazer, I think the Formics knew something was out there," Ender whispered into his comms, keeping his voice steady. "They've been hiding from it all along. Maybe that's why they never struck back at full force." Mazer responded, his tone a mix of concern and frustration. "Ender, if the Formics were afraid of this thing, then we're in deeper trouble than we thought. Whatever's out there, we can't fight it with what we have. You need to bring that queen back to Earth so we can analyze it, see if she can help us find out what's coming." Ender wanted to agree, but there was something gnawing at him. The vision had shown him more than just ships. He saw a distant, lifeless world, far from any known system, and at its heart, a colossal structure. It wasn't Formic. It wasn't human. It looked older, ancient, and yet there was a pulsating energy about it. The structure had a hold on the ships, as if it was calling them, guiding them. But to what? Ender couldn't shake the sense of dread. This wasn't just about defeating another alien race. This was something else entirely, something bigger. This was what the Formics had been running from, what they feared more than anything. And if Ender had interpreted the Queen's memories correctly, whatever was coming had already set its sights on Earth. His thoughts were interrupted by a blinding flash of light outside the shuttle. The darkness of space lit up, the stars momentarily washed out by an explosion far off the port side. Ender's hands flew across the controls, and his ship swerved sharply to avoid the shockwave that followed. "Ender, what was that?" Graf's voice cracked through the static. Ender squinted into the distance. He could barely make out a series of small, glowing objects hurtling through space, closing in fast. They weren't Formic, but they definitely weren't human either. The strange ships from the Queen's vision were real, and they were coming. Mazer, Graf, we've got company, Ender muttered, gripping the controls tighter. His mind was racing, but he felt a strange calm settle over him. All of his training, all of the games, the simulations, the battles, they had prepared him for this moment. But this time, it wasn't a simulation. This was real. And there was no backup, no second chances. They're not Formics. There's something else. And they're not here to talk, he added grimly. As the ships drew closer, their eerie, angular shapes becoming clearer against the backdrop of space, Ender's heart pounded in his chest. There were dozens of them, each moving with precise, coordinated efficiency. It was clear they had only one objective, to stop him. Mazer, I'm going to need backup, Ender said, his voice calm but urgent. Whatever these things are, they're not here to negotiate. Graf's voice cut in. Ender, we've scrambled a fleet to your location, but they won't reach you in time. You need to evade them until we can get reinforcements. Evade? Easier said than done. Ender's hands flew over the controls as the first of the alien ships fired. A streak of blinding energy shot past the shuttle, narrowly missing its hull. Ender gritted his teeth and banked hard, sending the shuttle into a tight roll as he tried to shake the incoming fire. But the alien ships were fast, faster than anything he'd ever encountered. The Queen in his lap stirred again, her emotions flooding his mind. This time, the fear was more intense, more primal. She knew what these ships were. And for the first time, Ender realized they weren't just hunters, they were executioners. Ender pushed the shuttle harder, weaving through the stars, but no matter how hard he maneuvered, the ships kept pace. They were relentless, closing in, their weapons charging for another strike. He had to think fast, or this would be his last stand. Then it hit him, the structure in the vision. The ancient, alien structure. The Queen had shown it to him for a reason. It was a sanctuary, or maybe a weapon. Either way, it was his only chance. Ender punched in new coordinates, setting a course for the distant world from the vision. He didn't know if he'd make it, or if the structure would offer any protection, but it was the only shot he had. The shuttle lurched as another blast rocked the ship. Alarms blared, warning him of critical damage to the hull. He didn't have much time. He pushed the engines to their limit, feeling the G-forces press him against his seat as the shuttle shot forward. The alien ships followed, their weapons still firing, but Ender was gaining distance. Hold on, Queen, Ender muttered, his focus sharp, his resolve unbreakable. He was going to make it. He had to. The planet loomed ahead, its barren surface dotted with massive craters and the towering, ominous structure at its center. Ender angled the shuttle toward it, hoping the alien ships would be hesitant to follow him into the unknown. As he approached the structure, the air around the shuttle seemed to distort. The ship's instruments went haywire, unable to process the strange energy readings coming from the structure. Ender's heart raced. This was it. He didn't know what awaited him inside, but he was about to find out. And whatever it was, it would change everything. Ender's shuttle pierced the planet's thin atmosphere, the once distant, barren world now rapidly growing in size as he descended. The strange, alien structure dominated the landscape, rising out of the planet's rocky surface like a silent sentinel. It was massive, larger than any human-made construct, and its dark, obsidian-like exterior gleamed ominously in the faint starlight. As he approached the structure, the pressure in his mind from the Formic Queen intensified. Her emotions were a chaotic mix of fear and awe, as if even she didn't fully understand what they were about to face. It was clear that whatever power lay within the structure had been dormant for centuries, perhaps millennia, and waking it up could have unimaginable consequences. But there was no turning back now. Behind him, the alien ships were still on his tail, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere with deadly precision. Ender knew they wouldn't stop until they either captured or destroyed him. And somehow, he knew that these new enemies weren't interested in diplomacy. They weren't here to negotiate, they were here to eradicate. As the shuttle neared the structure, Ender's controls began to flicker. The closer he got, the more interference there was, strange bursts of energy that scrambled the ship's systems. His instruments failed one by one, and he was forced to rely purely on instinct to guide the shuttle down to the surface. The structure loomed larger and larger, its architecture impossible to categorize. It was as if the laws of physics had been bent in its construction, its walls twisted at odd angles, and dark, pulsing energy flowed through veins of light embedded in the material. The sight of it sent a shiver down Ender's spine. This place was ancient, older than the Formics, older than humanity, and possibly older than the stars themselves. He had no choice but to land at its base. The shuttle came down hard on the rocky ground, skidding to a stop just meters from the entrance of the structure. Ender winced at the sound of grinding metal, but the ship had held together, barely. He took a deep breath, his heart racing, and unbuckled himself from his seat. "Stay here," he murmured to the Formic Queen, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. The Queen remained still, her compound eyes reflecting the strange energy from the structure. Ender stepped out of the shuttle and into the harsh, alien landscape. The air was cold and thin, but breathable. His boots crunched against the rocky surface as he approached the entrance to the structure. A massive, arched doorway stood before him, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols that shifted and moved as if alive. He reached out cautiously, his hand hovering over the alien markings. Without warning, the symbols pulsed brightly, and the door slid open with a low, rumbling sound. Ender took a step back, his pulse quickening. The air inside the structure was thick with an eerie, almost oppressive presence. He could feel the weight of the ages pressing down on him, as if stepping inside would invite something ancient and powerful to wake from its long slumber. But he had no choice. With a final glance at the shuttle, and the alien ships still circling above, Ender stepped through the doorway and into the darkness beyond. Inside, the structure was even more overwhelming. Vast corridors stretched endlessly in all directions, the walls lined with alien technology that pulsed with energy. Strange lights flickered along the floor, illuminating the path ahead. As Ender walked deeper into the heart of the structure, he could hear a faint hum, a low, resonating vibration that seemed to emanate from the very core of the place. The further he went, the more his mind buzzed with static. The Formic Queen's connection was fading, replaced by something else, something cold and calculating. He couldn't explain it, but he felt as though he was being watched, studied, even. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath him. A deep, resonant sound echoed through the corridors, followed by the distant clatter of machinery coming to life. The walls around him began to pulse with energy, and the symbols on the walls glowed brighter, casting long, shifting shadows. Ender's heart pounded. Whatever he had activated was coming online. He rounded a corner and came face to face with a massive central chamber. At its center stood a towering obelisk of dark, crystalline material, its surface covered in the same shifting symbols. Surrounding it were massive machines, ancient, but still functional. They hummed with power, their purpose unclear. Before he could take another step, a voice echoed through his mind, not the Queen's, but something else. It was deep, mechanical, and devoid of emotion. "You are not of this world. State your purpose." Ender froze. The voice wasn't coming from any visible source, and yet it seemed to vibrate through his entire being. He took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. I'm looking for answers," he said aloud, though he wasn't sure if the entity could hear him. There was a long, unsettling pause. Then, the voice returned, colder than before. "Your kind seeks destruction. Your kind brings war. We have seen your future, and it is one of ruin." Ender's mind raced. This thing, whatever it was, knew about humanity, and it didn't trust them. He could feel its hostility, its mistrust. But there was something else beneath the surface, something deeper. Fear. "What are you?" Ender asked, stepping closer to the obelisk. The symbols on the obelisk flared, and the machines around it began to hum louder. The ground shook again, and Ender had to steady himself. "We are the custodians. The Watchers. We were here before your kind, before the Formics. We safeguard the balance of the universe." Ender's breath caught in his throat. Custodians? Safeguards? His mind raced as he tried to comprehend the enormity of what he was facing. Before he could ask another question, the voice spoke again, its tone darkening. "You have brought war to our doorstep. The Formics fled us, but now they return, and you have led them here. The consequences of your actions will ripple across the stars." The realization hit Ender like a punch to the gut. The Formics hadn't just been running from humanity. They had been running from the custodians, from the ancient power that now stood before him. And now, because of him, the balance had been disturbed. "You must choose," the voice said, its tone final. "Leave now, or face the reckoning you have unleashed." Ender's mind reeled. Leave? How could he leave? The alien ships were still out there, the Formics were still a threat, and now this ancient force, was preparing to strike. But deep down, he knew he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without understanding the full scope of what he had uncovered. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood before the obelisk, the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders. What had he done? And more importantly, what was he going to do next? Ender stood frozen, his heart racing as the massive machines around the obelisk hummed louder, casting eerie shadows across the alien chamber. The voice of the ancient custodian echoed in his mind, cold and unforgiving. "You have brought the reckoning." The word sent a chill down Ender's spine. The obelisk flared with light, and he could feel the building energy of something immense, a power that had the potential to rewrite the fabric of reality itself. Ender's mind raced. He had led the Formics here, unknowingly disturbing an ancient force that was far beyond human comprehension. But could he truly be responsible for what was to come? He had fought battles, commanded fleets, and made impossible decisions before, but this was different. The choices he faced now went beyond tactics or strategy. They would affect the future of every species in the galaxy. The custodian's warning echoed once more in his mind, demanding a decision: leave now, or face the consequences of the war he had ignited. The walls trembled as the energy continued to build, and Ender knew that time was running out. Whatever was about to happen, it would change everything. The fate of humanity, the Formics, and the very universe itself hung in the balance. But he wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his eyes locked on the glowing obelisk. His mind churned with 100 thoughts, 100 possible futures. The cost of action weighed heavily on him, but the cost of inaction could be even greater. Ender reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the obelisk. The symbols flared once more, and the voice spoke for the final time, its tone darker than ever before. "You have chosen. Now, face the consequences." A deafening crack split the air as the obelisk shattered, sending a wave of energy ripping through the chamber. Ender was thrown back, his vision blurring as the entire structure began to collapse around him. The machine shrieked, and the walls buckled under the force of the unleashed power. As Ender tumbled through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of the alien ships above, their forms dissolving into the storm of energy. The Formic Queen's connection surged and then cut off entirely, leaving him alone in the maelstrom. And then, silence. Ender lay in the rubble, his heart pounding in his ears. The obelisk was gone, and the power that had been contained within it had vanished into the ether. But the consequences of his choice were just beginning. As he stood shakily to his feet, the air around him crackled with tension. The galaxy had been forever altered, and the forces that had been unleashed would ripple through time and space in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. He had made his decision. But what would come next?